So I'm going to do a case study related to innovation and frontier peoples. And so let me do a bit of an introduction to that, and then I'll turn it to Paul to explain what we did. So when I came to Frontier Ventures a few years ago, innovation was something that Paul Dubinsky and the Launch Lab were really working hard at. And Stephen Spicer, I think, is also here. He's been part of that. But really trying to rethink how we do innovation, how to blend spiritual discernment, how to blend systems thinking, design thinking, et cetera, and really kind of picking up on the part of the divine spark, really, I think, that led to the U.S. Center and Ralph Winter's kind of genius for innovation and that sort of thing. One of the things that we also noticed, of course, and I think all of you have seen this, is that one of the barriers we face in seeing movements among least reached peoples is that the kind of people getting sent to engage are sometimes part of the problem, and sometimes that's because we have deeply embedded church paradigm barriers and DNA issues. And so at the same time, there are more and more movements happening among UPGs. And then, as we've heard this morning, Becky Lewis and others have been alerting us to the reality of a sort of new way of explaining the least reached among the unreached in terms of frontier people groups, and particularly the description of the largest frontier people groups. And so in 2019, Frontier Ventures set a goal of seeing 4 movements to Jesus, or movements to Jesus among 4 of the largest frontier people groups, 4 of the largest 31, and kind of began to ask a question. What if we were to select a frontier people group that was in proximity to a movement and experiment with developing or with adapting Frontier Ventures' innovation approach to work with leaders of a movement to engage a frontier people group? And so we selected for a first experiment because at least one of the leaders had enough English. There was already a significant mature movement going on. This particular leader had a lot of experience working with Westerners and knowing how to sort of adapt their stuff. And we felt like we could sit down with him, explain, hey, this is what we do with innovation when we're working with Western people. What do you think? How might this work if we brought together some of your leaders and worked on this? So we selected one of the largest. It's in that group of 31. And we picked this movement, and we then decided that we would go there after a lot of work to be ready to adapt this, go there and work with some of the leaders. Ostensibly, our aim was that we were going to focus on the frontier people group and see if we could come up with some small experiments that might lead to a movement among them. And so what happened was what we call a TICO lab, transformational collaborative, and but applied in a very different context and setting. So at this point, I'm going to turn it to Paul Dubinsky to kind of explain what happened when we got there and what some of the results were of that experiment.
Super, thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Let me go ahead and share my screen if you don't mind. There we go. So what I would like to say is, yeah, we did this transformation collaborative. And let me just go through what we did in 5 days, basically. We really had a Western approach originally. And so we said, hey, you know, we need to fix that. So we really focused on, you know, grounding everything in scripture. We really wanted to make it for oral learning so that it could be reproducible. We didn't want to have lots of documents that people had to have or lots of technology. And then also we had a toolbox of activities. So typically when we do workshops, have lots of activities so that they can pull out ideas, pull out the passions that people have. So, so we had a bunch of things that we collected that we didn't know which ones we were going to use, but we had a toolbox ready for it. And then we wanted to recontextualize, of course. We wanted to make sure that we used insider movement methods of prayer, of worship, we wanted to be culturally sensitive. So when we did prayer, we wanted to do it their way. When we did worship, we wanted to do it their way. And because that's also a part of everything we do, as Kevin was saying, it's a spiritual experience as well. So on the first day, we got there and we really wanted to build trust. And so everybody told their story. And of all the people in the room, we noticed that there were two different groups. There was a group of people who were Muslims, who were followers of Jesus, but never had really become Christians, just had been Muslims. And there were some Muslims who had become Christians and used a lot of Muslim language, but were basically Christians. And you know, there was a lot of difference in the room. So we noticed that as we were all telling our stories, but we did build a lot of trust, and it was a great time. So we said, you know, like I said, one of the things that we focused on was really using scripture to bring out the problems, because when you do innovation, you have to find out what exactly the problems are so you can build your solutions based on the needs, right? So to do that, we did inductive Bible study. We thought we took really the first 8 chapters of Mark to identify the problems that the people were seeing in scripture. And these passages showed the importance of seeing, you know, how seeing and hearing how Isa worked and did things correctly and how he handled problems. And of course, we did everything translated, but they did their own chart of all the things in Mark that they saw, so that they saw how Jesus handled problems and the like. It was quite fascinating. That was just part of the chart. So then we asked them to choose problems in their personal context. So not just the gospel problems, but the problems that they saw in the gospels that Jesus handled, but their own. And as we came up with problems, it was really a false start because there were 2 groups in the room, right? So one group said, hey, we can't bury our dead in the cemetery. The children are being mistreated in schools. There's hostility toward them in the community. And every time that they mentioned one of these, the fellow who was doing the translating, and he was doing an amazing job, said, you know, we solved that 5 years ago. That's a great, I understand that problem. I'm sorry you have it. 10 years ago, we solved that problem. And each time it awakened in them, like, how did you do that? So at that point, we kind of left the room. We said, okay, you guys need to talk and handle the situation that's there. And so we let them do that. We weren't really a part of that, since we're not a part of the solutions for those particular problems. And they came back, and it was an amazing sort of time of repentance for them. Really a holy moment where they said, you know, the Christians in the room said, no, we recognize what we've been doing wrong, and we want to fix that. And so the next day we came back, they gave us that report that's what had happened, that they had repented of being Christian, essentially. And then we came up with more barriers and more problems. So they said, as we listed all the problems on the room, and here's a list that, you know, we did everything in sticky notes, right? Everybody could read and write. So sticky notes are found in every country of the world, I think. So we used those and put them up on the wall. We didn't use anything special, you know, no markers that were, you know, unique or whatever, just sticky notes. And it was just wonderful. A blank wall and sticky notes are fantastic. So they they took a look at the problems that they had, and they said, hey, you know, we really have problems with that we created ourselves. And they listed some of those the day before. And then they said, you know, we really have unreached people groups that we need to work with, and we need to do a training thing that's unique to us, that we've noticed that in our Jamaats, we have some training issues. And then they identified clear barriers of family and social conflict, and lack of religious understanding. Now, it was the people that they're talking to, their religious understanding, but also their own religious understanding. The Christians in the room misunderstood a lot of different things. And they said that's a barrier too. So on day 4, we came up with some helpful approaches. So in the transformation collaboratives, we seek understanding. So in the broader complex context, and then there's that time of prayerful reflection. And then we go ahead and try to get some prototypes together, some safe to fail experiments. And we'll talk about that. So as we went through, we had identified problems. So we wanted to say, okay, well, what are the upstream causes of those problems? Okay, they may be real problems, but how do we fix those? Or where did they come from? I'm sorry. And as we talked about where they came from, we use this analogy of going down river. That's not a tree, it's a river. And you know, because the problem started at one place and they end up like silt in other places. So we identified those problems and where they came from. And then we took some time to really prayerfully reflect. We said, you all just take some time. We're going to give you a large chunk of time and go pray. So they did that. And it was a real holy moment. They came back really, really touched by the Lord. It was quite impressive. And then, of course, one of the things after prayerful reflection is we need to imagine what the future could hold. So we asked them, you know, what might faithfulness to Allah look like in response to all your problems? And so they drew pictures. We asked them to draw pictures, to use different parts of your brain, you know, not just your verbal and not just your written, but your also, you know, your creativity. So these are the drawings they come up with. This is typical, by the way. This is not because this is a different country. This is any place that we've done transformation collaboratives. This is what the pictures look like. So, and the question that we came up with really is, how might we be reconciled to our communities and families and build integrity in our communities to help others learn about Isa and follow him as Muslims. That was the problem that they had come up with at the end. And quite impressively, they wanted to follow that. So, and the 5th day, this is the last day, we did some follow-up with them. So we said, did you have any dreams last night as you slept? And so one man said, yeah, you know, I was talking about working among Muslim fanatics and becoming a fanatic. And a man,
Paul.
Yes. Oh, thank you. A man came up to me and said, yeah, that's okay. I agree with that. And then we said, how are you feeling about being reconciled to your communities? And they talked pretty honestly about that. So then we said, okay, that's great. We need to come up with some safe to fail experiments. So how do you safe to fail, right, in some of these situations? Well, we did come up with some barriers that they would face. We chose the fellow who said, I need to become a fanatic in order to influence the village as well. And so we came up with some safe to fail experiments for him, some small steps that he could take to see if he could accomplish that well. And then, of course, we gave them the model, and we drew this up on the board, just like this, basically. And we gave them a template of this that they could use. These are all the steps that we did with them. And we did it by illustration. And then we gave it to them in this form, and the leader said, and I quote, beautiful, beautiful. That's how he said it. It was really nice. And a blessing and an affirmation for what we were doing, because we were trying to model good behavior in transformation collaboratives, how to go ahead and seek understanding, how to do prayerful reflection, and then how to come up with prototypes or safe to fail experiments. And they caught that in a beautiful way. So thank you. I think that's my time.
Thank you, Paul and Kevin, for sharing about the Transformation Collaborative. What a great model. Friends, you have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions to Kevin and Paul. Please send me the questions or put them in the chat so that they can be asked. Kevin, any final thoughts?
I think I see the question, did they know each other before or never met? So we had thought this was going to be a group of a bunch of people from one movement who would have already known each other, but without consulting us, which was fine, the main guy that we'd been working with to get ready for this decided to invite some folks from representing some other groups in the country. And that's why, as Paul mentioned, there were these two main kind of approaches to things, and some of them had never met each other, and so it was really important to do the stories and that sort of thing. So, but it was really wonderful just to see how that emerged, and how they learned to care for each other, love each other, help each other along, trust each other. It was pretty profound, and I think there was a unity thing going on that we hadn't anticipated as part of the plan, but that was pretty awesome byproduct, actually.
All right, there's another question. Paul, what's the biggest problem that you see that so little national workers are reaching the frontier people groups?
Well, I really think that the end of the Transformation Collaborative highlighted that to some extent. So part of it is lack of knowledge, and some of the barriers that go with that. So when the group heard of all the different people groups that we were looking at or thinking about, and they started to talk among themselves, hey, I don't think there are any believers over here. I don't think there are any believers over there. So one of the fellows who, Kevin, I don't know if you would call it a reconversion, but
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, but he decided to really embrace his Muslim following of Jesus, and really in that movement they say that to follow Jesus as a Muslim, that's real Islam. And so he said, I'm going to do that, and he's gone to a particular one of the. There were 6 people groups actually that these guys said that they wanted to go out and reach. And this one guy, he's doing that. He's still sort of seen as a Christian in his village, but he travels to another village all the time. And he goes, and they don't know him as a Christian, but only as a follower of Jesus who's a Muslim. And they're a different people group that is an FPG actually. But I think it's a lack of knowledge and a lack of encouragement maybe. We're all ethnocentric, and so they're ethnocentric, we're ethnocentric.
Yeah,
you have to help people bounce out of that.
And I think sorry, Paul, to jump in there, but I think there was some recognition of that even in the preparation time. Some of the comments, and I've been talking about the Frontier People Group concept with others, some friends in. And all of them have mentioned like, oh, well, yeah, now that you mention it, yeah, there are these people, but we never thought about that. And I think that one of the things that in some cases, there's just been a natural movement from one people group to another people group. It's just flowed naturally. There's been no need to sit down and strategize. People just did it. But in this case, it was just asking the question about, hey, there's this thing called frontier people groups, and some Western people have come up with this idea, and here's what it means, and here's some of the groups we think are on that list. What do you guys think? What do you know about them, et cetera, et cetera. Just kind of doing that sort of a process I frequently would get the response of, now that you mention it. And then they'd start consulting with their other leaders and thinking, wait, do we know any believers among these people? And how did that happen? And why don't we know any believers? Are they joining our Jamaats? Are they not joining our Jamaats? Why are they not joining our Jamaats? All that kind of stuff. So that same sort of process we all have to go through, I think, of our own cultural self-awareness emerge. And just to elaborate on something Paul said.
And I do
Um,
think that it handles a little bit of what I'm sorry, I'm messing up your name,
Bill.
mentions in the comment box. So,
Um, Another question from Rusty. What are some ways to help a Muslim educated friend willing to explore Isa without feeling they have to block discussions as a Christian and block reading the scriptures?
You mean to help the Muslim not feel they
Yes.
have to block it?
Yeah, I think that's the
Mhm.
the essence of what Rusty's asking.
Okay.
Rusty, you want to ask the question?
Yes, you're getting the context right. Friendship, uh, open. He actually read 25 pages of Matthew in the message, and then all his barriers he learned about scriptures corrupted.
Oh, right.
I don't want to be coerced on anything,
Yeah.
which is not from us, our relationship.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
just a reaction.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Rusty.
I mean, I can just speak from my own experience, and this won't be true for everybody everywhere. But I mean, when I would encounter that in most of my experience, which doesn't then translate everywhere. But normally, when those kinds of things came up, I mean, and we were normally starting from Quran anyway, and so the Quran actually, there's places that helps address some of those questions itself, and in terms of confirming previous books and things like that. So we would just sort of do some inductive discussion of that, which can be a little tricky. It just depends on the relationship, and but that's kind of how we managed that, Rusty.
And our last question is from Chuck. Chuck, can you ask your question verbally?
Sure. Most of us are highly educated, and you made the observation that you wanted to be more oral oriented, and yet in your presentation and with your with the group, you used inductive Bible study, which fantastic, but there appears to be a balancing or a dissonance of, if you want to be oral oriented versus written oriented. Inductive Bible study would be highly educated oriented, and could you just discuss the various balance between that?
Yeah, actually, though, Paul, if you want to add to this too, but it did turn out that in this case, people felt comfortable with written text. We went into it prepared to be a completely oral process. My own experience with inductive study is that it works well in oral context too. Inductive isn't about sitting with a written text. It's about a mindset and approach to the text. And so inductive study can be done orally just as well as written. It's just a different dynamic.
yeah, that's true. And there are different levels of orality. I myself am an oral preference learner, but I've got a master's degree. So, but at the same time, what I'm trying to say is it is a sliding scale. And when we got to the group, we noticed where they were at on that scale and just and did that appropriately.
All right, one more. We have time for one more question. Darren, do you want to read your question, please?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about how Christians, a lot of different countries, we commonly think of missions geographically. We move from one area to another. And it seems like sometimes churches in South Asia often think of missions as this way as well. We'll send somebody from the south to the north. In what way? I mean, is that a challenge? Is that a barrier to unreached people group thinking? And if so, in what way?
No, I mean, obviously people move around an awful lot and people interact an awful lot. So, but Kevin, I think that you really do handle the finer points of that. I mean, obviously, in many of our databases and so forth. Everything seems to be pretty cut and dry, but life is not really like that. And Kevin, you have some really great illustrations of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it challenges necessarily the UPG concept itself. I've just found that there's got to be this blend of, if I can use the terms, inductive and deductive things. So I have found it helpful to take people group lists, people group concepts, and just sit down with leaders once they're kind of farther along with this, um, and just talk about it. Hey, here's this list, some American people made this list, and, they love to see the gospel spread, but we don't really know, if we've got all the information right. What do you guys know? And then you start getting a lot more inductive, and sometimes people will just spout off what they think they know, but other times they'll say, well, you know what, we need to find out more, and have done surveys even on their own of trying to figure out where are people and what are they doing, et cetera. So I think it's I don't know, Darren, it's more like discovering down close what the terrain is really like that the map is talking about. And it doesn't mean the map is wrong. It just means the map can only do what the map can do. And I see the people group lists as maps, and they're really helpful. And obviously, the more that they're drawn by people who've been on the ground, and know what that mountain is about, the better. But they're still good. And but then it has to somehow get blended with the experience of the people that are actually strapping on a backpack and hiking the trail that's on the map. So yeah.
Thank you, Kevin and Paul. Great presentation.